Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Shrek the Third from 2007. So as I've been going through and reviewing each of the Shrek films, I was, like the first one, about what I remember, like the second one more than I hadn't seen it before, more I thought I would, and I had heard that this movie was like the worst one. And as I watched, I realized that everyone was right, and that this movie was pretty horrible. I believe Nick Tendo called it Shrek the Turd, which I would agree with. This is a horrible movie and doesn't really understand the structure of what a Shrek movie is. And there is a distinct kind of format for Shrek movies, and it's kind of surprising that they sort of abandoned it, especially with plot elements that could have made this probably a pretty significant one, if not maybe possibly the last one if they'd done it right and shown a real maturity in the character of Shrek. But in terms of like the form of what Shrek is, this is not a successful entry or a successful sequel creatively. Financially, of course it was. And I understand a lot of people say they just churn this thing out, and I 100% think they did. Basically, the whole format of a Shrek film, Shrek 1 and Shrek 2 or Shrek the Second, whatever, is the idea, like, why is this even called Shrek the Third? That's not even brought up. It doesn't even make sense. It should just be called Shrek 3. Like, there's no... Anyway. So the whole idea is, in the first one, Shrek likes being in a swamp, but then is thrown into going on this adventure and being a responsible person, helping out all these people. He does it maybe for selfish reasons, just get his swamp back, but for the most part, he learns about himself, he meets Fiona, he meets Donkey, he grows as a person through, even though, he's kind of a begrudging hero, and there's a lot of complications and things that happen in the story because of that decision. The same thing is true of Shrek the Second, as I'm calling it now, because why the fuck not? Or it's Shrek 2, whatever. Where basically in that, Shrek decides he really loves Fiona, and he's kind of thrown into this world of Fiona's parents and realizing it's not just simply like committing to this relationship with this woman. There's like more things involved with this. There's a family, and that kind of plays a very relatable way. Like, most people fall in love and they're like, oh, there's like all these other people involved and do a wedding and all that stuff. That's like kind of relatable, and there's complications with Fairy Godmother and Prince Charming and all these things. And I think a lot of that is going to the idea of screenwriting, where it's like, because this happened and this caused this, basically. And Shrek the Third doesn't do that at all. It has like kind of elements in there that you could make into that, but the whole idea is basically that Fiona's dad dies like right at the beginning of the movie. They do show Shrek and Fiona having trouble being the royals, basically, and then he dies and Shrek's like, well, I don't want to do this, so I'm gonna go find the other heir, and goes to find him, and then Fiona's like, I'm pregnant, and then Prince Charming shows up and wants to overthrow the kingdom because of the last one, I guess. And there's really no reason for Prince Charming to be there. Like, it's basically just like, well, we're bringing him back, but it just doesn't... The Prince Charming plotline is probably the one that makes literally no sense whatsoever, and should have been cut for a villain like maybe the other heir he went to find is evil and would do bad things for the kingdom. And Shrek had to make a decision, like, do I do what's right for me, or do I do what's right for all these people who will have this terrible king? Like, that could be an interesting narrative there. But they don't do that. They just have Prince Charming is back because he's back. Now, I know there was this idea at the time that I heard screenwriters and directors talk about, where they knew people would watch the previous sequel so much they felt they didn't need to set up, or at least that's what they said. I don't know if it's real screenwriting advice. They didn't need to set up the next film as much. They didn't need to spend that much time on continuity or setup, basically. I think that is, you can sort of see that in things like Prisoner of Azkaban and stuff. That's a better example of it working. But I just didn't really... I don't know. I don't know if it's that. I just think it's lazy writing. But the main crux of the problem with this is Shrek... there should have been something with his wife being pregnant and him kind of begrudgingly going into this but realizing he is ready or something, or the sacrifice of, oh, my wife's pregnant and I have to sacrifice something. Like, I do have to be king because there's no way I can afford these kids in my swamp or be able to take care of them without the infrastructure of the kingdom. Something like that. But they don't do that. They just like have Shrek trying to avoid responsibility, and then the spoilers, I guess, for this movie that's kind of old, he does actually do that. That's the whole point of the movie. Like, every other Shrek film is him about accepting responsibilities, how much greater his life is, how much he's realized about himself, and how he saved all these people by doing that. And in this movie, he sort of does it with this villain who just is there, and then he basically is like, well, fuck all, I'm going to my swamp and I'm going to raise my kids or whatever. It just doesn't really work on any sense of story level. I think that's the problem with it. Like, this feels like the laziness that DreamWorks was kind of known for at the time. Like, this is Shark Tale DreamWorks. This is not How to Train Your Dragon, Kung Fu Panda DreamWorks. Like, this is the lazy DreamWorks. That like if when I started this Shrek series, I was surprised and I was like, oh, maybe Shrek isn't as bad as people acted like it was. And I think Shrek the Third, like, thudded the reputation of this franchise. It is a horrible movie. It doesn't really do much with the fairy tale stuff. It doesn't have as many puns with it, really. It doesn't do as much with that. You have so many characters, and you bring Merlin in, and it's voiced by Eric Idle, and I love that, and you're the one franchise who didn't just go John Cleese. Like, James Bond and Harry Potter had John Cleese, and they didn't bring out their pythons in the 2000s. Like, I don't know why John Cleese was in so many like 2000s franchises. I've never really figured that one out. Maybe he had a good agent for a couple years or something. I really don't know, but he is, and I like that they're like, oh, we'll get another python in this, and they could have, you know, maybe Terry Jones is in one, or they found voice recordings of Graham Chapman or something, but like they could have kept that going. That would have been funny, but the Merlin character stinks. I think there should have been a follow-up. Like, Puss in Boots and Donkey have great rapport, and then they have this swap thing, which, like, there's certain elements of this movie that honestly just feel like they just wanted gags in, and it doesn't really work. It just feels very tacked on, which I think is the other problem with this. Like, it throws away the structure of the franchise. It throws away the structure of what a Shrek film should be, and then it just, like, throws in a bunch of these bits and, like, has famous people, and it's, like, not really that funny or endearing or heartwarming. And it's like, if it had been the structure and it failed, I think, like, that would probably be better than this. It almost feels like someone experimenting, but not really thinking about what they're fighting it from, just sort of doing it. And that's it's such a kind of artistic failure. It makes me wonder, like, why they went ahead with this screenplay wise. It feels like something that needed to have a major serious draft. And I know, like, Andrew Adamson, who was involved with the first one and stuff, he helped come up with the story, and they had a lot of screenwriters. But this, to me, just doesn't feel like the Shrek films. This feels like an utter failure, basically, because they don't really understand, like, the villains have to connect to the thing. It's not like, well, people know he hates Shrek. I'm like, I don't fucking care. Like, I'm not watching Shrek 2. I'm not watching Shrek 1. I'm watching Shrek 3. And you could say, oh, well, yeah, but they're a part of a franchise. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really see it that way. I don't. I think, like, you could have had a cooler villain. I don't know who it was. Justin Timberlake's character, that was not great. Like, Justin Timberlake film career probably should have begun and end with The Social Network, and, like, I don't know, In Time was okay. Just like, he's not really that great in this. It just feels like they made a film about someone avoiding responsibility while they avoid the responsibility of actually making a good Shrek film. Maybe that's the whole theme of it. Like, they're like, we kind of fucked off and we made $1 billion anyway. That's pretty cool. But I just don't think they really knew what they were doing with the franchise, and it is more about the characters than the actual world they're in, and I think that's important parts of it. Like, when the king dies, the frog prince king John Cleese plays, they go around that LA town, but they scran around it. They're showing, like, the backgrounds, and the backgrounds have, like, the puns of, like, this LA fairy tale land, and it's like, that's, like, not appropriate. I understand it's like, that's the setting and stuff, but you could have, like, not shown those things, and it just felt like they weren't really thinking through any artistic decision. Like, why have a song at the end over the credits and not have, like, Donkey and Puss in Boots performing that song or something? Like, even the laziness of that fucking bugged me. This film, it just doesn't really want to think about it, what it's doing ultimately. Like, it has no framework, it has no theme almost. It's just like a collection of characters and stories, and they sort of like, I guess this is sort of what it is, and it feels apathetic in the worst kind of corporate 2000s way. It doesn't really work ultimately, and I think that's upsetting, because you're kind of like going with the franchise, and then you hit this sort of like wall. Like, I think it's akin to, like, Rise of Skywalker or something, where you're like really into a franchise, and then you see the third one, and you're like, oh, I just wish you hadn't even made this. Like, what even is this? Like, I don't want this at all. Could we just pretend this didn't happen? And I think that's probably because it's not funny, it's not entertaining, and there's a lot of things they could have actually interestingly done with it, and it's kind of a total shame. I just think, like, you had this framework, you have this structure, you just basically needed a major rewrite and to get rid of the villain, and, you know, to make it connect somehow and make this like an actual living, breathing screenplay. And instead it just feels like maybe a third draft, and no one thought about structure. And I don't know if any of these people had written a screenplay before. I sort of get the impression they didn't, and don't really understand writing and form and function. Like, I have high doubts of the intelligence level of the people doing this, because it just felt sort of so lazy. I wonder if they're just stupid or just bad at it. I consider probably both. I know Chris Miller who directed this, would go on to do Puss in Boots. I liked Puss in Boots the last time I saw it, at least. But this is a real, I don't know if it's a step down as much as it is falling down the stairs and hitting your head and kind of like wanting to walk away from the stairs, because what the fuck is this? Understand now why like every Shrek movie has memes from it, except this one. Like, because why would you want to? You wouldn't want to. You don't want to. And that's where we sort of are with it. So I get why Nintendo called it Shrek the Turd, because this is like a stinking pile of crap. And I understand why most people seem to not like this one, and it seems to rub everyone the wrong way. This is the worst of DreamWorks. This is the worst of this franchise. And it's pretty easy if they had stuck to the structure and actually got it to work. I do actually think there could have been an interesting film here. But since they didn't, and they made whatever the fuck this is, which I say it that way, not that I don't care. I more say it in that way because there clearly wasn't an idea behind what they were doing. If they'd done like, oh, we're not going to do the structure, but we're going to do something else, and they had an idea behind the structure they were doing, but they don't. It doesn't connect. It's not good screenwriting. It's just like, you do things in a script, you do things that are like, this causes this and that causes that, and they all rise together and things like that. And this just doesn't do that at all. Just a random assortment of things. It kind of pretends it does, and it could trick you that it's a good movie. But if you like watch all of it, it's pretty obvious it isn't. It's just like, Shrek should not have ended up in the swamp at the end. He should have become the king. He should have had that self-sacrifice, because all of the Shrek films, other than this one, are about growing up and maturing and having to deal with the reality while also being begrudging about it, basically. And Shrek the Third just doesn't do that. Why? I don't fucking know. I have no clue. There's no theory. I just think it's the laziness of them to maybe not want to deal with it because they wanted more Shrek sequels. Part of me thinks that, another part of me just thinks like they didn't really consider it. They're just like, this is good enough. And if this is what they consider good enough, frankly, I can understand the reputation DreamWorks had at the time, which was pretty fucking poor. You know, Kung Fu Panda would come out the next year, and I think people, but I remember people being like, I mean, it's DreamWorks, they suck. And like, I remember that, and a lot of the post Shark Tale ones, I got that with, and I'd never seen this one, but this feels like the apathy they put on screen is the apathy I feel for it. But I probably feel less than apathy. I just want this. I just don't want much to do with Shrek the Third. I think they abandoned something that could have been really special and made whatever the fuck this was. So if you've seen Shrek the Third and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.